creative things in their field and allowing them to give individual presentations, which will be wrapped up by a Q&A. So today, because the 21st century classroom is something we all think about, and education being a popular topic here, we've asked 3 people who have very different views about what the quote-unquote classroom of the future would look like and how it should be designed to present. So in no particular order, we have Greg Farrington, who is the president and CEO of the California Academy of Sciences, which was just built and designed by Renzo Piano, one of the world's great architects. We have Graham Wyatt from Robert Stern and Associates, who has done a lot of work in classroom design. And we have, is it Sandy? Speicher from IDEO. You may have been here before to listen to David Kelly on the spirit of design, and she's also going to talk about classroom design, and this session will also be moderated by Linda Tischler of Fast Company. So I welcome you to the stage. I'm not quite sure who's going first, but I'm going to let this turn over. Sandy, are you first? Okay, Sandy Speicher from IDEO.
Wow, dark. Hello out there. Hi everyone, I'm Sandy, and I love the title of this session, How Do We Design Learning Environments for the Future? The title of the session reminds me of when I was in graduate school, and I was studying education with Elliot Eisner, who's one of the great minds of our time. And Elliot used to ask us, if an alien landed on this planet and walked into our schools, what would he think is happening? And we'd brainstorm. Perhaps he would think it was all about learning to sit in rows. Like this. Maybe he would think it's about learning to move at the sound of a bell. Maybe he would think it's about learning to sit in 40-minute increments and override your bodily functions in the process. Or maybe he would think it was a game where it was about trying to guess the answer that the person in the front of the room was thinking. It's highly likely that our alien would conclude that our schools are very well designed for our industrial time. And whether he landed in 1890 or 2011, he would probably draw the same conclusion. But of course, as we all know, times have changed a lot. Kids today are growing up in a world that looks like this. And this. You can see it. And this. We're all constantly aware of epic challenges. We rarely make decisions alone anymore. And participation and expression have become the norm. I love this image. I always think, like, would this have happened with Roosevelt? Different times. So, the real question is actually, how do we design learning environments for today? At IDEO, our belief is that we do that by beginning with understanding today's learner. We understand what they need, what they care about, what they wish for, and then we design solutions that meet those desires. So today I thought what I'd share with you are a few different tips about how to do this. First one is about understanding people. So this says, look, listen, and respect. Can you guys hear this feedback? Sorry. Look, listen, and respect. Now, it's very easy to make observations about what people are doing to understand what are the trends of our time, but it's very difficult to actually allow them to be, right? We tend to judge them. We tend to think that's a problem because it's not like it used to be. So I'm going to tell you a quick story about a teacher in LA. His name is Enrique. And Enrique noticed that his students didn't necessarily love their history class. They weren't so engaged in history, but they did spend a lot of time on their phones. Now, it's really easy to judge this. In fact, a lot of schools are banning cell phone use in schools. And a lot of us adults are criticizing kids for how much their head is in their phones today. But the truth is, we do it too. In fact, some of you might be on your phones right now. That wouldn't surprise me. There's even a street in the UK where they have padded all of the street poles because there were so many injuries from people walking and texting. 1 in 10 people injured walking and texting. Anyway, The point I'm trying to make is we're all doing these behaviors. Our youth are just better at it than us. So I'll bring it back to Enrique. What he decided to do was create a bring your own technology policy in his class. He has, while he's doing his history lectures or showing videos, his students are tweeting. So he has this stream of thought behind him that shows him what each of his students are thinking. So as a teacher, he actually gets to deepen the discussion by seeing what questions come up, what thoughts come up. He can connect what each person is thinking to what he's talking about in the moment. It also has great value for the students. This is Oscar, he's 14, and he talked about how actually getting to use Twitter in class has allowed him to have a voice. He didn't feel comfortable, he was kind of shy, didn't feel comfortable participating before. And so now he's able to share some of his thoughts and be seen by his classmates, which is a change for him. So simple observation, and with the respect, acknowledging what they actually desire to do, creating a really radically different classroom environment. Second tip, designing for motivations. Behind everything that we're doing, behind all of our behaviors, there's a core human need that is inspiring it. So we can absolutely look at what people are doing. What are they choosing to do? What are their interactions? What are they consuming? What are they compelled by? But we can also then look behind that and say, what does it mean for what they really care about, what they're really interested in, and then what we can design for that. So Katie Salen spoke yesterday. Did anybody go to her talk? Hard to see, but yeah, quite a few of you in here. That's great. Katie Salen has founded a school called Quest to Learn, which is a middle school in New York that is a game-based school. Now, it's pretty easy to draw the conclusion, to make the observation that, let's see, come up, people like to play games, right? But that doesn't mean you automatically just design games for learning, right? What we can do is we can look at behind this interest. Why are people choosing to play games? And there actually are a lot of different motivations. I want to connect with others. I want feedback on my actions. I want to master a system. And so we can take these motivations and say, what do we design to meet those motivations? Katie talked about this yesterday, that in their courses, for instance, the students are given missions, something to explore. They have a job to do. And that really is about that idea of people wanting to master a system. If I give you a challenge to say, figure out how to do this, you can rise to the occasion. They've also rethought the way that they structure their classes. So the way they, instead of having just math class, science class like we typically think of, they've actually had, on the outer edge, you can see the titles of their courses, like, for instance, The Way Things Work. We're all kind of motivated and interested to understand things, right? So they've created this course called The Way Things Work, and they take educational standards like math and science, and they work that into that premise. So the class is now about something that you're interested in and engaged in, and you learn math and science because you just can't help yourself. So again, motivations, radically different school model. Third tip for you today, which I think is the hardest, letting go of assumptions about what's right. We've all been raised in our school system. We all have this imprint about what it means to learn, what learning looks like. And so we kind of default there. We don't even realize it. Like David Kelly said in the last session, a fish doesn't know he's wet, right? So how do we step outside of those assumptions in order to get to new places? Anybody heard about the granny cloud? I love this story. So we make a lot of assumptions about what it means to be a teacher. And Sugata Mitra, who's a professor in the UK, does a lot of work with schools in India. And especially in more poor areas, it's very difficult for them to find qualified teachers to teach English. And English is a fundamental part of the curriculum. So Professor Mitra was interviewing students one day and kind of just catching up on what their interests are. And he asked them, what do you wish for? And one student said to him, I want to have a British grandmother read me a fairy tale. Like, who wouldn't, right? I want that. So Professor Mitra decided he can do something about that. So he built a network that's now called the Granny Cloud, which is about 200 retired volunteers in the UK who are giving hours per week to, over Skype, if you can see it, it's a little dark, but over Skype, they are teaching English to kids in India. So letting go of our assumptions about where teachers come from, the kind of full-time nature that they have to have in the classroom, gives us a radically different solution that, with our time, because of the technology, is able to be constructed fairly easily. Fourth tip, experimenting your way towards systemic change. Now, one of the things that happens in education a lot is we can envision very quickly. We can say, imagine if classrooms look like this, imagine if schools look like this. But because we have a current system, it's very hard to get from where we are right now to what we can imagine. So how do you get there? How do you get through that gap? Well, one of the things we believe is you have to keep trying so that you keep learning and evolving. We call this experimenting. We build what we're thinking about and we try it out. An example of that, we've been working with the University of Phoenix, and they primarily serve adult learners. Adult learners have a unique situation in that they have a full-time job, they often have families, they have a lot that they're managing throughout the day, and they're home at night, late at night, they go online to do their assignments. And actually, it's an incredibly vulnerable experience to be learning. You're stressed from the day, and people feel very alone. So we designed for them a future vision for what their online learning platform could be. What's the classroom environment for when you're at home working on your schoolwork? And one of the features that we designed in was social connectivity. University of Phoenix is a network of about 400,000 students. It's highly likely that when you're online, whatever time of day it is, someone else is online too that's either taking the same course as you or has taken it before. So we've designed into the platform that anywhere you are, you can reach out to somebody who's also online. Now, we created this idealized vision for the future. And what University of Phoenix did was decide to try that out. Instead of having to rehaul their entire platform, spending years to do it, they launched an experiment. They created a social networking feature that they rolled out into their School of Business. Now, with University of Phoenix, this experiment has about 140,000 people. So they got all kinds of feedback. What was great, what wasn't working, what else people wished for. And now they're actually rolling this out university-wide and to their alumni network. And so they'll have about 1 million people available for when, at any moment, you can get help. So experimenting your way towards system change. Now, when we start with a learner-centered perspective, what do people really care about? What are they interested in? We can see very different types of learning experiences that we can create. And just to be a little cute, I can't help but wonder, if our alien came back into these environments, what would he think? I believe it's a really exciting time. We can look at that industrial model and feel daunted by how difficult it is to change. But the truth is, that paradigm is breaking down. We're starting to see amazing solutions. The other panelists today are going to talk about some great stuff. We've seen some other things this week that are really exciting about learner-centeredness in how we're designing learning environments. And the great thing is that we can all do it. It's actually not that hard. It's just about attuning ourselves and really valuing what people today care about so we can design for people today to keep learning. These are 4 tips that I shared with you. And if you're curious to learn more, we've actually codified this process for educators. Do we have any teachers in the room? Awesome. Thank you for your work. We love teachers. We love what you do. I believe you are the ultimate designers, the most important ones in our society. You are designing learning every single day. You are helping people find new futures, find themselves. How do you be more intentional about the things that you're designing? You design your classroom environment. You design interactions. So we partnered with a school in New York, Riverdale Country School, to co-author a toolkit. It's a PDF, it's free, it's downloadable, designthinkingforeducators.com. And it's essentially a design process for teachers. We're starting to hear some things back. We just launched this a couple weeks ago, so we don't have a lot of stories yet. But I did hear from one teacher who told me that he used this process to redesign his classroom, co-designed with his students. We had one teacher tell us that she is using this as the basis for developing a science curriculum for her school. And we had another teacher tell us that they're using this as the basis for professional development. So they're creating cohorts of teachers who are designing for school challenges together. So my belief is the game-changing idea here is that we all can be designing learning environments for the future, just to have a simple process that begins with the learner. Thank you.
No, that's not it. We'd go back to the beginning, please. So my take on the challenge that was given to us by Kitty and Linda and others is to look at the role of game playing, as Sandy has just described it, because that is where so much of youth spends its time and frankly where it learns. But this segment could also be called just as well, probably should be called, living the game, because what I'm interested in is not just learning solely in the virtual world, but learning at the interface between the virtual world and the real world. And the example I'm going to use today is environmental sciences. Now, this gaming model of education, I think, works very well for some disciplines. We saw Saul Kahn yesterday speaking, Saul Kahn talking about Khan Academy and instruction for math. Very good model. Another extreme would be learning how to swim. I don't think that works very well in the virtual model. And there are other fields that are in between. Art, painting, learning how to play a musical instrument. Environmental sciences, I think, falls in the gray zone between a field which lends itself to virtual instruction and one which is very much dependent on life in the real world. Now, Sandy has already spoken about the classroom of the past, and that is a starting point. My own interest in gaming and my belief in its power as an educational tool comes not from being a game designer and not from being an educator. Frankly, it comes from being an architect. In 25 years of designing buildings, learning environments for K through 12 and for higher education, seeing what works, applying exactly the sorts of models for classroom and learning environment design, which Sandy has just been describing. The learning environment of the past, all faces to the front, lecture, I hate to say it, I'm afraid it's what I'm doing right now, is not only of the past, it's very much of the present. This is the way most students are still educated. There are a variety of very powerful models now which allow the classroom, the teaching that takes place within the classroom, to be transformed by architecture, by technology, by furniture, and most of all, by changes in teaching methods and pedagogical styles. But a lot of that education can really take place outside of the classroom, and I'll get there in a moment. Both within the classroom and outside the classroom, pervasive technology is finally having a huge effect. This had been promised for decades, and I've seen it in my work, the promise never quite fulfilled. Now it has really come, where you are starting to see distance learning, the use of the iPad, huddles for collaborative work, all coming together in learning environments. But what it is that young people really like to do, and what they have most access to personally, is gaming. And they like gaming because they enjoy the collaboration that comes along with it. They like the competition. It's just sometimes teamed with collaboration. That there is real power for them to being able to aspire to a goal. And in the virtual world, the goal in the successful games is almost always set at a level which is difficult to achieve, but it is achievable. And it can be achieved without the deep risk that sometimes goes along with learning in the real world. And it allows the learners ultimately to make a difference. So the game which I'm in the process of designing right now, along with many others, is an environmental center. It's the Kohler Environmental Center at Choate Rosemary Hall, which is in Wallingford, Connecticut. This is a building which is under construction right now, so you see the rendering. It is located at the center of 265 beautiful acres adjacent to, but not at the heart of the Choate campus. 265 acres that include meadows and fields, second growth forest, wetlands, a spectacular natural environment, and yet quite remote from the daily lives of most Choate students. The center, which you see here, a 30,000 square foot building, currently under construction, was both conceived and supported financially by Herb Kohler, who is the CEO, the chairman of the board of Choate Rosemary Hall, but also the CEO and chairman of the Kohler Company. He is interested in a facility which is a living learning environment. Students will go from the main campus to the Kohler Environmental Center, and they will live there. They will live there for a period of between a week and a full trimester. So there is a residential wing where up to 20 students can live with faculty advisors and a visiting scholar. There is a commons wing, think of it as a living room, dining room, kitchen, where they take their meals, where they meet socially, where they're involved in cooking and the environmental issues associated with food service are brought forward. There are classrooms, although much of the learning experience takes place outside in the natural world or through the living experience day round within the building. Classrooms and laboratories allow for lecture and group teamwork. There is also a greenhouse. So the greenhouse, see if this advances. Yes, greenhouse is a very important component of this, both for the biological and botanical studies, but also it helps in the study of the environmental impact of food production, some of which can take place here. All of this is connected and unified into a single building by a day-lit gallery that connects the residential, teaching, and commons wings, and it all looks onto a south-facing courtyard which combines recreation, think of it as a traditional academic quadrangle, and also food production. There will be a garden here for the right seasons. The mission which was put forward to us, to me as the architect, is multidimensional. There are items of the mission which are associated with the building. First, it is to be LEED Platinum, which is a stamp, an honor, which is provided by the U.S. Green Buildings Council and relates to the environmental quality and performance of the building. But beyond that, it is to be net zero energy, which means energy self-sufficient. And specifically, over any given year, the building will not consume more energy than it produces. And those two components are central to the educational mission, which is to create a 24/7 living, learning, immersive environmental education experience. Not clicking. So achieving the mission, the first part of it, frankly, LEED Platinum is the least difficult. It involves efficient design and a consultant team who knows what they're doing. The energy self-sufficiency part of this is actually much more challenging because as an architect, I can design a building that could be energy self-sufficient, but it will only be energy self-sufficient if the users use it in a way that makes it so. And they can only do that if they get real-time feedback on how their performance, their behavior, day round, is affecting the resource use of that building. And all of that, as part of this mission, would be an overlay, would be the basis of this multidisciplinary curriculum, which is in the process of development right now. And it all adds up to a day of teachable moments. It's not education in the classroom, and then you go home and play Frisbee or see your friends play video games. This is the game. You're living in the game. In order to succeed at the game, you have to be working at it day round. An important tool that we've provided to allow that to happen is a building management system. The building management system will monitor the use of electricity and heating and cooling and water. This is actually not such unusual technology. Many modern buildings have these systems, but they're invisible. None of us, and certainly the students, would ever know that this system exists. So what makes it different is that we are making all of that information not only transparent and accessible, but we're also making it influenceable so that students can intervene on the behavior of the building and alter the energy consumption output. They can do that by viewing what's called a building dashboard, a monitor that's located at the front hall as you enter. But you can also receive this information on the internet. Yes, there's a website, there will be computer access to this, and the students can receive it on all of their iThings that they have. And there are apps for that, which are already in development and more on the way. So this is highly transparent information, which allows the opportunity for immediate response. Now, one of the things that I said about the video game at the beginning is that the goal has to be a significant goal, but it has to be achievable. So in order to make it achievable, we have already improved the handicap significantly by giving them a very energy efficient building. This building uses less than half of the typical energy, the energy consumed by a typical building. The energy that will be consumed is produced either by photovoltaics or by hot water solar heaters. And in effect, this building will save over a given year the amount of energy that cars and carbon that cars would produce, 40 cars in a given year. And that's compared to if it were not an energy efficient building, if this were just a typical building, academic building of this size, it would consume and produce carbon equivalent to 82 cars. The tools that we give to the students are a high-performance building envelope, highly insulated, highly airtight, Again, this is something which for most students would be entirely invisible, and yet we're designing the building in a way that will allow the students to see and understand those systems and how they work to their benefit. Natural ventilation is an important part of maintaining comfort, and so this is part of the game. Students will have the tools to monitor the energy performance of the building, and also the most obvious tools that all of us have to monitor our own personal comfort. But they have to work together in teams in order to administer the natural ventilation of the building in an appropriate way. The heating and cooling that is used within the building comes from two sources, both of which relate to the ground. There will not be a furnace, there are not going to be radiators, there will be something called an earth duct, which in the winter will bring in outdoor air and will slightly preheat it with the temperature of the ground before it comes into the building, and in the summer it will pre-cool the air. Then on the right of your slide there is a ground source heat pump, which is also a teachable moment. How does that work? How does that relate to Boyle's law, which they're studying in physics? How is it that air conditioning system can actually be turned into a ground conditioning system to heat and cool this building? There is a certain component of the building, which is the greenhouse, which is inherently energy inefficient. And we are going to be using waste cooking oil to heat that. What is the relationship between a calorie that comes from nutrition and a calorie which is used in heating a building? Why is waste cooking oil the useful product? These are things that students will be able to learn. Hot water is a huge consumer of energy, and there will be systems for monitoring that. Ironically, showers consume 75% of the energy consumption based on hot water. And finally, natural lighting. The natural lighting systems are now very sophisticated. They allow the building to control natural lighting and to balance artificial lighting and natural lighting without student intervention. Yet we're going to allow student intervention specifically so that students can determine what is the implication of their behavior on the energy consumed by lights. Why is it, for example, that lighting is much more efficient in watt per lumen in the winter than it is in the summer? Somebody asked me that question later. All of this adds up to an active learning environment. Around the clock, it's an immersive learning environment. People will go out of doors into the Nature Conservancy to learn in the natural environment. They will be learning from the building. They will be working together, competing in a system which involves accountability so that each student will have to be accountable for their behavior. And that real-time feedback, which I've been describing, will give awareness which properly channeled, will lead to behavior change. A moment about the competition. The competition is with other cohorts. And the big win the students will achieve is energy self-sufficiency. And they can only achieve that by working together, and they will be judged against subsequent cohorts in the building. Finally, leverage and scalability. How can something like this, which is clearly an expensive project, be rolled out and become of benefit in a much broader environment? Part of this is simply by spreading the message, educational message which comes out of the center, but a big part of it is spreading the method whereby students are learning not just in the classroom, but they're learning about their behavior and the implications of their behavior on the built environment. Thank you.
Thanks. Well, I'm Greg Farrington, and I am the head of the California Academy of Sciences. And I'm an enthusiast over the use of information technology in learning. Notice I didn't say teaching, because learning is what really matters. But today I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about the world of the real, because that's the focus of the California Academy of Sciences. If you wonder what it is, or you haven't visited, think American Museum of Natural History West, only it's older. 1853, the gold rush era. The first thing that came to mind was form a natural history museum, I'm sure, but it happened. And so this institution's the third oldest in the country and the oldest west of Washington. Its focus today is on two rather modest topics: life, how did we get here? And sustainability, how are we going to find a way to stay? I'd argue with you that in the coming decades, these will be among the most important topics that our society faces or the world faces. It's thought of as a natural history museum, at least in the past. I don't like the word museum, because what do you think of when you think of museum? You think of long corridors, easy places to get lost, generally bad food, and guards who don't exactly look friendly. You're on your own. Now that doesn't characterize all museums, but it certainly doesn't characterize the ideal one. What are the programs of this institution? Public engagement, exploration, and education. And if you watched the evening news last night on NBC, you would have seen a wonderful clip on the Academy's recent expedition to that great center of biodiversity, the Philippines, which has gone on over the last 8 weeks. Its focus is on real science and not brain candy. Now, I made this slide before I realized that the wonderful people at the Aspen Institute are using brain candy in their sort of emailed update on what's going on. So I want to detach from that and apologize to them. But nevertheless, what I mean by this is, if you look at institutions that deal with science and the public across the country, you see far too many of them that have major exhibits on science called Harry Potter. Or there's another wonderful one that's traveling called, it's about a very famous British woman scientist, Princess Di, and it focuses on her dresses. That is not science, folks. And if we can't make science interesting to real people, it's shame on us, not shame on the people. So this is what the Academy is. It's a pretty interesting place, and the world is shaped like an egg there for a very simple reason. When you think of the world, think of it as an egg. It's your responsibility. Well, the Academy is old, as you can see, and it's been lucky enough, well, very unlucky at the first time, to have a major earthquake in 1906. It was quite disruptive in San Francisco, as you know. It then was rebuilt in Golden Gate Park. And doesn't this look like a classic institution? They come with Greek columns, not exactly this one, high staircases, and the message they send to people walking by is, we are very serious, you may approach. We're not sure you'll be welcome, but you may approach. Fortunately, in 1989, and I know it's risky to say fortunately, the latest big earthquake damaged this enough that something had to be done. And a very wise and visionary board decided to raise $500 million, hire Renzo Piano, and build a completely new institution. That is glass on most sides except the facade right here, a living roof, a living, breathing kind of teaching, learning environment, and a planetarium here. But planetariums have many more important stories to tell than just the cosmos. They're really sort of science education or education immersive environments. An indoor rainforest there, a marvelous aquarium underneath, and a whole new institution to experiment with in engaging the public. The inside is glass, 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 and light. The building is LEED Platinum certified. It is a terrific success in terms of design. This is the central piazza. Renzo was very fond of the piazza. I think he imagined a 7-year-old sitting there drinking cappuccino and contemplating the world in sort of philosophical terms. And you have to occasionally remind Renzo, the people who visit this place aren't just tall, many of them are short, and they don't sit and drink cappuccino. But nevertheless, the central piazza is a marvelous theater in which to engage people. Well, before going to the final, to my sort of summary of things I want to mention to you, the process of building this building was a process of taking everyone, and that included every fish and every penguin and every specimen, all 26 million of them, and moving them to the middle of San Francisco to temporary locations, and then to wait while the building was built, several years. Now, if you're on the staff of an institution like that, don't you think that one of your thoughts will be, I can't wait to opening day. It's the finish line. It's not. It's the starting line. How many times would you go to see an empty building? And the answer is a few times if the building is spectacular enough in architectural terms. But the real value of the building is as a stage. What matters is the play that goes on in the building. And so as the staff were reminded as we made our way back to Golden Gate Park, opening day is the starting line, it's not the finish line. And the real power of the architecture is not simply in the architecture, but it's in how it inspires a complete rethinking of how the institution carries out its mission. And that's been the fun of the last 3 years. How has the new architecture inspired a kind of intellectual reinvention of the institution? First of all, 75% of the people who work there now didn't work there 4 years ago when I joined the academy. Now, there's no direct relationship there. You could say that this is, Jack Welch of the museum world. Not quite. It's that in the process of closing and reopening, there was a marvelous opportunity to add a whole range of new people to the institution. So we've attracted very interesting people from all over the country to come and work at the academy, where one of the most important characteristics for the people is entrepreneurship, reinvention. The glass itself is inspiring. This glass is transparent. And so the message of transparency is the message that everything that goes on in the institution is integrated, has a common set of goals, and that we should work in an integrated fashion. Oftentimes museums are thought of as a cluster of galleries and displays. I prefer to think of this building as a cluster of theaters, because the most important thing that goes on in the building, in my mind, isn't the opportunity for people to look at something in a passive way, but for them to engage with people. The best kind of education goes on in that kind of personal engagement. Again, the play is the thing. So how do you use those stages? How do you use those various theaters within the building? How do you convince a staff of 50 researchers who actually would prefer to be off in the Philippines hunting for elusive fish? How do you get them to talk to 9-year-olds? Or engage with families who visit, or engage with 99-year-olds? Because real researchers, first of all, are doing real things, and they have fascinating stories to tell. But in very few institutions in the world is there the opportunity for that kind of exchange to happen. We're making it happen in San Francisco. Then there's the importance of experimentation. Many schools will open this fall and teach the way they will teach this fall for one simple reason. It's the way they taught this spring. And if the response of a faculty or a group of educators to a new building is, this is really great. Now, where are the notes I used last year? Something's fundamentally not right. And in this particular building, we're emphasizing the importance of experimentation. We know our goals, the engagement of people with real things and real science. How are we going to achieve that? Some of our experiments will work brilliantly, others will fail brilliantly, but in the process we'll learn what we really want the institution to be in the future. Another concept is the integration of all functions, research, education, and exhibition. And typical institutions of this sort are built around the idea that there are explorers who go out to the world, and then someone else shows what they bring back to the public. Here we want the storytellers to engage with the public, and for the whole thing to be a kind of living theater. Another offshoot of this transformation is new audiences. You know, the most important green resource in the world runs on peanut butter. That is kids. And smart kids are born in all neighborhoods. And we waste an enormous number of smart kids every year because too many kids don't get the opportunity to see the real and use that most important word in all of education, which is wow, which is the kind of opening of the mind to learning and to passion and fascination. New audiences. And finally, an emphasis on the real as opposed to the virtual. I happen to love the virtual too, but this is the kingdom of real and the kingdom of wow. The piazza is the main stage. This was a program on conservation. The O got a little frisky there and started to run off, but you get the idea. And then there's nightlife. Do you realize the California Academy of Sciences is the hottest date spot in town on Thursday night? 2,000 people, 21 years old and up, coming for real science with a few attractions. I call it drinks, science, and mating. Drinks we provide, science is our specialty, mating is up to them. It's the hottest date spot in town, consistently for 2 years running, and it's an enormous amount of fun. We have sleepovers for kids, we have sleepovers for adults. Sleeping with the fishes takes on an entirely new meaning. Architecture has provided the stage for this and an inspiration, and Renzo was the magnificent designer of this building. What really matters is what we do with it. And that's the real game changer. We're still in the process of inventing. The words are real, wow, activating the mind, the importance of kids and their enthusiasm, the importance of understanding the issue of life and sustainability, and the sheer joy of encountering something that's real that you never encountered before in your life. And by the way, the food's good. So come to San Francisco, come to Golden Gate Park, visit the Academy of Sciences. We'd love to see you.
That's sort of the gaming concept. These are the teams.
Those are fantastic presentations. What a sort of diverse model of what learning is going to look like in the future. I think, you know, it's pretty exciting to see. We can do virtual, we can do real, we can do online, we can do games, all kinds of things. Here's what we're going to do for the bulk of the session. We have, you know, about maybe another half hour, 20 minutes. We're going to talk a little bit, start thinking about your questions. We're not going to wait to do questions at the end. We'll sort of shake it up a little bit, throw in some audience questions as we go along, and just keep it moving. I have to say, as a moderator, I have the prerogative of the first question, however, and actually these guys are going to talk to each other a little bit too. But I just wanted to know, Graham, how are you going to stop those highly competitive kids who managed to get into Choate from turning this into some kind of variation on Survivor meets Lord of the Flies?
I think you're painting the dark side of that. That's exactly what we hope will happen.
Well,
And
I can just see them in
actually-
layers of fleece turning down the thermostat to 45 or something.
Well, but that's a very interesting implication. A group of people could choose to do that in the game. That doesn't necessarily satisfy all of the goals of human comfort. But cohort after cohort, we believe, will find their own strategy for winning the game.
Okay.
And if that happens to be one of those strategies, all the more interesting.
Well, as David said in our previous session about the question that the kids always have at the D school, who's going to be grading this? What is the metric for like whether we win or not? The one who uses, the team that uses the less energy, or the one that makes the most comfortable, energy efficient environment?
Well, I think that is something that the students and the faculty who live with them as a family have to determine. There are a variety of very interesting topics that go along with this related to that. For example, how is the group who happens to be living there in April and May, which is a pretty good time to be energy self-sufficient, going to compare with the folks who were there in August or the people who were there in December? And in the game world, that's solved by ups. You get one up on weapons or one up on intelligence. Or for people who are older, it's your golf handicap.
I was going to say, it's a handicap kind of thing, right?
Yes, so that whole system is something that really has to be developed as the life of the building progresses.
Oh, it's going to be fun. I'd love to have you back in a year to see the
scars.
consequences, the scars of this. Graham, actually, you had a question that you wanted to start off with. Is there?
Well, there are a variety of things that I wanted to talk to Sandy about classroom design, but I think that you should lead your questions to us, and then let's get it open to the audience.
All right. Okay, let me just ask one other one that struck me, and that is, these are glorious buildings that both you, Greg, and Graham have talked about.
And in an era of like really tough budget constraints, you know, I can imagine there are lots of fabulous school plans that have gone down in flames whenever they failed to get an override in their community. How do you choose between, you know, if you had to pick between beautiful space and teachers? Let's talk about that dilemma.
Greg first?
I'd be happy to comment on that. I use the building as an example of inspiration. But the most important thing that is going on in the building isn't the building. It's the rethinking, how do we engage with the people who come to us so that the learning environment is as rich as possible. Any group can do that if they decide to do that. Across this country, from the East Coast to the West Coast, in every major city there's an institution, something like the California Academy of Sciences, bigger, smaller, older, younger. But far too often, they're like the public school system, or whatever school system, and that is they do this fall what they'll do this fall because they did it in the spring. At the risk of offending Graham, building a great building is relatively easy. You need a plot of land, you need a lot of money, and a really great architect. But changing how people act in their lives is hard. People love progress, they love the building, and they do have a temptation to think, oh, we're back home, life goes on the way it was. It doesn't matter what building you're in, it matters how you act your role in society. You can be in an old cinder block building and the most exciting place around. The message of the Academy is that the learning environments for kids are not limited to the school system or to the schools they're in or their formal education. There are many other learning environments and learning engines. And one of the great joys of being in an institution like this is we're totally free of all of the political aspects that surround the education system. And you are free to innovate, to experiment, to see what works and see what doesn't work. And that's an enormous opportunity. And if an institution's not taking it, something's wrong with the institution.
You know, I'm interested in what you're saying, Greg, because I remember when I did a story on the Stanford D School that originally they started out in a double-wide trailer. You know, David loves to tell the story of, you know, they had this trailer or they painted one wall red and said, you know, put up a banner, this is the D School. You know, it was hardly sort of the $35 million Hasso-Plattner, you know, Institute of Design. Sandy, maybe you, since you're there, you can talk to what are the essential elements that you need for a good learning environment that are regardless of architecture or space?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually love what Greg had to say, though. I think that it's a great point that the building can be the entryway, right? So as you design this amazing space, it prompts people to behave in new ways. But as I showed in some of those examples today, that can happen through many other entry points as well. And I think one of the essentials in there is about having that perspective of, I can make this change. I can design a new answer. And so whether it's that teacher who decided, oh, I'll actually ask my students how they feel about their classroom and what they'd like it to be constructed as, which is a very simple change. It's actually just me asking you a question. Or a giant building that really reconstructs the way that we think about everything. To me, all of those things happen because you have that perspective of, I can make a difference.
Mm-hmm. I actually did a story in our April issue about a group of kids up at the school at Columbia, which is the Columbia University, the school for the faculty's kids, plus they open it up to a bunch of kids from the neighborhood. And a design firm in New York called Aru Leiden teamed with Bernhardt Design, which is a sort of fancy furniture company in North Carolina, and they decided they were going to come in and teach design thinking to the kids in this classroom. I think they were 13-year-olds, and they asked them to envision the classroom of the future and led them through the design thinking process. And they were asked to design a chair and a locker and a desk. And the kids were quite astonishing in what they came up with. And, you know, the design firm came back, you know, every month, and they taught the kids how to do prototyping and how to do needs finding and how to make presentations. And it was a very project-based experience for them. And then, you know, Bernhard came in and took the designs that Aru Leiden had synthesized from the kids' input and turned them into actual pieces of furniture that were were unveiled at ICFF in New York this year, and they were just astonishing. It was actually the hit of the show. And the thing I loved, there were two things I loved the best. That one was the chair, and the kids had decided that they wanted a chair that was comfortable, but where they could fidget, and they needed to be able to fidget enough that they could, because they said it helped them think. And so they wanted to fidget enough to be able to think, but not enough so that they got in trouble with the teacher. So they were, trying to parse the difference there of what that would look like. And they managed to come up with a fabulous solution. And then they did a locker that was really quite beautiful. And it had a little mail slot on it that you could put love notes in. So back from the virtual to the real, the kids thought that was just spectacular. And they said, our lockers are our bedrooms for the year. And, it was a wonderful way of conceptualizing, what a classroom, piece of furniture would look like if you had actual user input on it. And, it was so successful, in fact, that some Argentinian guy came up to Jerry Helling from Bernhard and said, I'm building three schools in Buenos Aires, and I'd like this furniture in them by September. And he said, well, you don't understand. This is just sort of a concept. It's kind of if you go to Detroit and see the fancy concept cars. He said, no, you don't understand. I want this furniture in my school. So whether they actually managed to find a manufacturer or not, but it speaks to sort of the power of design for a learning environment and what user-centered design could come up with. I'd like to throw it out just before we do any more questions. Let's take some from the audience. Yes?
The title of the program is around learning and... It is on now? Yeah. The title of the session is around learning environments, yet the discussion has been very much focused on schools and museums. And we're in a world where we all have to learn daily in whatever job we're pursuing. I wonder if the principles that you've developed and are pursuing in schools and in museums, to what extent you think they're applicable to our work environments. How do we change our work environments into learning environments?
Okay, take it away, Grant.
I can grab a piece of that because that was absolutely and specifically one of our goals in designing the Kohler Environmental Center. That the methods by which students get feedback from the building should also be methods that can be applied outside of the traditional educational environment. And the specific example that I use is that with my two now teenage daughters, I have made the point since they were young, when you flip on the light switch, it isn't just light that suddenly appears. Somewhere in a microscopic way, a big coal-fired power plant on the banks of the Ohio River senses that difference and aggregates it with the behaviors of other people. And so there are actually very real-world implications to that act of flicking a switch. Those sorts of learning experiences, the teachable moments, do not have to be taught in a classroom. They don't even have to be taught outside of the classroom in the Environmental Education Center. They can be lessons that we all learn every day through similar feedback mechanisms in buildings, such as the one that we're in right now.
I'd like to build on that also. One of the things that we're learning as we are studying learners of all types, of all ages, in all environments, is that the behaviors are surprisingly similar. If we start by saying, how are people engaging in the world today? How do they consume information? How do they catch up with their friends? What are the ways they like to interact? We see that the behaviors are actually quite common at all ages. Now, the extreme of it maybe is easier to see in youth, but adults are actually doing very similar things. And so as we're designing for different ages, we're finding a lot of what gets designed in schools or in institutions is very portable over to corporate environments.
And I think you've mentioned something that is so spot on. I've spent most of my life in universities, and universities for a long time have suggested that everything you need to know for your life, we'll teach you in the 4-year plan or the 8-year plan. The 8-year plan costs a little more, by the way, but you got a choice. And after that, you're on your own, and good luck. And what the whole new communication and information technologies simulation technologies have given us is the ability to have lifelong learning in everything we do, and lifelong feedback. And it's what made the University of Phoenix inevitable. you might say, even though traditional universities may not have quite adjusted to the concept yet. That concept of lifelong learning in all sorts of ways, we've only begun to see how that's going to be worked out in society, and it's going to be fun.
Other questions? Yeah.
Hi, I'm Alvin from Chicago, and I'm an administrator at a pretty large community college. And this question is directed at Sandy, but anybody can take it. We also get a lot of students and faculty members that are noticing the interactivity in the phones and the iPads, and it's all over the nation, of course. And I see a theme about increasing collaboration and interactivity in all three of your presentations. But I know another thing what we're learning, and it was mentioned in the book Academically Adrift, is that there's a real need for individual discipline and deliberate practice that allows you to take advantage and be a good team player in a place like Choate. And I'm wondering, how do the design spaces that you're talking about encourage that or acknowledge that to have fruitful interaction or fruitful collaboration, you have to do the work to learn Boyle's Law, for example, and that takes sitting down and learning that individually.
So one of the, I think, great things that we're all starting to realize about how we design learning environments is that learning is happening all of the time, and it happens in many different modalities. So yes, there's certain things that we want to engage in a really individual kind of focused way, and certain things that make the most sense to do in a group. But traditionally, we've had a very sort of one-to-many mindset. And so now it's, I think, more about how we design in for all of this variance. And that variance helps us both learn the information, but also how to interact in different ways. So project-based learning, for instance, is a great way to start to navigate the difficulties of collaboration. What it means when we come together to design the classroom of the future. We might not all agree, for instance, if we're in middle school, but we can work that out. We can design, we can say, what do you think, what do I think? And together we can come to a new answer. And that's one modality that helps you learn a certain thing. Actually, oftentimes people find a lot about themselves in that process, how they want to participate and how they want to engage. And of course, they also learn information along the way because they have to find it. They have to understand what manufacturing processes are in order to know how to design a good chair. So there are different modalities that we can incorporate that help us get at a lot of those different skills.
Actually, I'd like you, Graham, to speak to that because it also is something that you come up against in the workplace, and the tension between the open plan office, collaborative spaces, and the need for people to do heads down quiet work, and where can they go if everybody's so busy collaborating all the time that you can't string two.
Right. I didn't call attention to it in my presentation, but one of the images where I was showing classrooms and laboratories showed students learning physics with an experiment and team basis around a Harkness table. And in fact, the tables that are used in this building will be Harkness tables. If you all don't know about Harkness, look it up. An amazing educational technique developed first Edward Harkness at the Phillips Exeter Academy in 1931, funded the development of this process, which was student-centered in a time when it really was all faces forward in a classroom. And it put the teacher very much in the position of being a coach. It did not work in most public K through 12 education because the size of the table in the group was typically 14 or 16 students, so economically it didn't work. But the Harkness method has now started to roll out in various other forms, and one that I really encourage you to look at is Scale Up. Go online. Student-centered active learning environment. What an acronym. For undergraduate physics. It was developed originally for physics in a university setting where they did not have the benefit of the small team environment that comes with Harkness table. But they broke it down into a series of groups where people could work in teams on experiments, collaboratively, technologically enabled. Please have a look at it.
With the issue of teaching physics, one of the biggest impediments to providing students a more effective way to learn physics, which you really have to do to learn. I mean, you can't download this stuff. You can't plug yourself into a USB port and take a nap. One of the biggest impediments is getting university faculty to imagine spending the time focused on teaching as much as they're focused on everything else in their lives. And it is a faculty who will know where their competition is around the world in research won't know whether a college 10 miles away has a wonderful new way of teaching physics that is remarkably effective with students of all backgrounds. We have to have that kind of innovation and commitment at all levels if we're going to succeed. But in the end, you got to do it. You can't download it. If you're going to learn to write, you've got to learn to write. You've got to write. There's no other way of doing it. That's why I don't think of the academy as a learning environment in a way, even though it is. I think of it as an enthusiasm environment, a curiosity environment, an interest environment, something that turns on people's desire to learn, but then they have to go about the process of learning, some of which goes on there, and a lot more of which one hopes goes on elsewhere. But that curiosity, that's where working with teams can spark the curiosity and the engagement in ways that sitting in a classroom never can. It's going to take some work in colleges and universities to get to the point where we have that level of innovation. It will be fun to see it when it happens. I hope I'm alive.
Hi, I want to build on John Hagel's question. He asked about adults. I want to ask about older adults. And by the way, I'm a resident of the Bay Area, and it is a wonderful place. The biggest problem I had in the first few months was just simply getting in the door. This place has been so popular that it's been kind of mobbed. But my question, I'm interested in the aging of society, and over the next 20 years, the only age group that's going to really grow dramatically is people over 60. It's going to grow 70%, and other groups aren't. When we think of education, we do think of kids and those 9-year-olds and the wows. But particularly in terms of the academy, I wanted to ask Greg is, what thought have you given, and what affordances are you offering for older adults and for their learning? Because people are living a long time. I know there was an interesting meeting a few years ago that I got to participate in that NSF funded on science centers and older people. And I'm just wondering where the state of that art lies.
The state of it is that it's obvious. I used to say that we were in the business from 9 months to 99 years. And then I met a 100-year-old woman who I had to adjust, that upper bound. I focused on K through 12 here because it tends to be the principal focus of many people. But lifelong learning about these topics is critically important. And a place like the academy, where every learner is a volunteer, you can't flunk them. You have none of that joy of the university where you can threaten, you know what I mean? You have to engage people. One of the areas we're going to spend we are spending an enormous amount of time on what we call lifelong learning. And in program after program, and you'll see more in rolling out in the next several years. So the Academy will be we have lectures at night, we have the HERP series in the middle of the town and so forth. I could go on and on and on, but I'm totally with you on that. It is not something which is lost. You mentioned how many people come. Yes, it is the most popular destination for people and tourists in San Francisco, except for the cable cars and the giants. But more than Alcatraz.
Anybody else want to? Yes. Oh,
Hi, my name is Terry Kane. I live here in Aspen. In addition to looking at Scale Up Online, do you have any other concrete, specific suggestions for someone that's currently under construction, working on a budget for an after-school learning center for high school students? I'm talking about colors, furniture arrangement, that type of thing. Thank you.
I have one other that I would mention, and that is to look at the Math Emporium, which you can also get online. And the Math Emporium idea was actually developed originally at Virginia Tech, where they had large undergraduate math classes and they had very poor learning outcomes. And they came to a determination, this is in the 1990s, a determination which is now fairly common to people, but teaching to the middle, half the students were either bored because they were ahead of the lecture, or half were lost and generally too embarrassed to ask the question to get them back on target. And what Virginia Tech decided to do, which at the time was very risky, was to do away with all of its lecture classes for undergraduate mathematics. They bought a 59,000 square foot vacant department store, a grocery store, and they cleared it out and they set up a series of tables, which you'll see when you go online, which are computer stations where students undertake self-directed learning modules which are produced by the university, so they're online, very similar to what Saul Khan was showing yesterday, but significantly predating Saul's work. And this was not done because they wanted to decrease the number of students, it was the teachers. It was done because they wanted to improve the learning outcomes. So students would go at their own pace with feedback from the computer, and if there was something they weren't getting, they turn on a light, and the teacher comes over for one-on-one coaching. So the teacher is then instructing them specifically on the challenge facing them and not teaching mathematics in a generic way. And there have been other offshoots of this, and I actually see a certain amount of it in what Saul was talking about yesterday, but please do have a look at Math Emporium.
Anyone else as far as space, color, things like that?
Yeah, just one quick recommendation I'd make is to keep things flexible. That, we've seen in these examples that space can really shape the way you choose to behave. And if we have really fixed furniture and we have fixed rooms that don't have the flexibility, then we sort of just mold ourselves to what that space is dictating that we should do. So having furniture on wheels, having reconfigurable tools allows us the flexibility to say, how do we want to shape this environment instead of how do we want the environment to shape us?
Yes, sir.
My name's Jim. One of the things I keep saying, we see islands. We looked at this in an island form. How have you reached out into the community or into the student's home within the environments that you're dealing with? How do you bring the community? How do you connect to the community? And what are the elements? How does Choate connect into the other elements within on campus and stuff like that? So what tools are you using to make those kinds of connections, and how do we go about developing it?
With Choate? Well, the answer to the second part of your question, which is about how does it influence or relate to the other programs that are taught on campus, is something which is in the process of development right now. But the goal of this center, they will be teaching history through an environmental lens. They will be teaching English and writing through an environmental lens. So let me give an example. What did Aldo Leopold have to say about the environment, and what is his place in American literature, and why did he become so popular to countercultural movements in the 1960s? What is the role of John Burroughs? Rachel Carson in Silent Spring. Was she really as politically liberal as people thought she was in the time, or was maybe her philosophy more politically reactionary? I'm just throwing out examples of the sorts of topics which are based on history and politics and English, but they can be taught through a lens of environmental studies.
But does it physically connect into this one location, or does it spread like an octopus into the other parts of the campus?
In the model that we're studying, it's physically in this one location, because the important part of the game is you're living there. And remember, I said it's the semester abroad. So the students are living there. It's a 24/7 experience, taking their meals there, recreation is there. That isn't the only model, but that's the way this model works.
The first thing you have to do to accomplish what you're talking about is understand that it really matters. And for some institutions, it matters more than others, simply by what their core mission is. But for the core mission of an institution such as the one I represent, it is part of the core mission. Some families have grown up naturally visiting places with high staircases and Greek columns, even when they're replaced by glass and a very welcoming atmosphere. Others haven't. And so a whole series of programs we have is how do we get to people who wouldn't naturally come to us? How do we invite them in? How do we engage them? How do we connect with them? And how do we create in a population that is evolving quite rapidly in a city like San Francisco and frankly nationally, how do we create a generation that views an institution like that as just as important to their lives as the previous generation did and the previous generation did? We have a specific endowed program to bring every 4th and 5th grader in the San Francisco public, private, and parochial system to the academy, where we provide the transportation, the educational material, even the T-shirt. And then each kid gets a coupon so that his or her family can come back for free. And 10 to 11% of those families do. And so it's a systematic, deliberate attempt to say, how can we get to people who wouldn't naturally get to us? Then there's all the other ways which reach out into a community. But
Sandy, would you like to bring it on home? We're running out of
I
time.
can just add one small comment onto that, which is in a more formal institution like a school. We did some work with a K-8 school to help them bring design thinking into their curriculum and built a small lab where they come and they do design projects. This is Nueva School in California. And it's very common for teachers, as they're changing their curriculum, to be afraid to share that with parents, because parents have a lot of opinions, and teachers are in that vulnerable space of trying something new, and so there's often a kind of communication gap. So what we helped them do in that case was to create learning programs for the parents that were exactly the same curriculum that the kids were going through. So just like kids were doing projects, parents were doing it too. And we brought them in evenings and weekends to do design projects, so they had a firsthand experience, not just a conceptual one, but a firsthand experience with what that program was about. And that, of course, really helps with adoption because they feel it, right? It's not just about what they're thinking. They actually had the feeling of what it was like to learn in this way.
But you don't have any connection that goes out into the home, the parent's home or the student's home, as that part of a real-time feedback element, not only to the student, but also to the parent.
That does happen a lot in our work when we're working with schools to say, make sure you're understanding the families that you're designing for. And so that part of that sort of feedback loop is kind of always staying in touch. What's happening in the home, what's happening in the school. But it's different for each school we work with.
Unfortunately, we're out of time. I'm sorry, but I really appreciate your coming to hear us. Thank you for your time and attention, and thanks to the panel.